Good morning. Our call to worship this morning was written by Jennifer Kitchen and contains phrases of a poem by Rumi, one of the many diverse sources of inspiration used by Unitarian Universalists throughout the world. Come, sit by our fire, and let us share stories. Let me hear your tales of far-off lands, wanderer, and I will tell you of my travels. Share your experience of the holy with me, worshiper, and I will tell you of that which I find divine. Come and stay, lover of leaving, for ours is no caravan of despair, but of hope. We would hear your stories of grief and sorrow as readily as those of joy and laughter, for there is a time and a place and a hearing for all the stories of this world. Stories are the breath and word of the Spirit of life, that power that we name love. Come, for our fire is warm, and we have seats for all. Come again, and yet again. Come speak to me of what fills your heart, what engages your mind, what resides in your soul. Come, let us worship together. And we can begin by singing together the first hymn in the Teal hymnal, Morning Has Come. And you may note today that in honor of the morning's theme, all of our musical selections were chosen today because they were all composed by Unitarian Universalists. So please rise now in body or spirit as we sing Morning Has Come, number 1000.
Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope there shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. A new day dawns, once more the gift is given. Wonder fills this moment shared together. The light of peace there shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. Open our eyes to see that life abounds. Open hearts to welcome it among us. The light of love there shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
Good morning. Welcome to Unitarian Universalist Church West on this first full day of autumn here in Brookfield, Wisconsin. In this place, we occupy the traditional territory of the native peoples of the Seven Council Fires, Ho-Chunk, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Menominee, Peoria, and Miami nations. These peoples, and many others who came before, thrived on this land for millennia, and those of us who are newcomers would do well to learn from them and honor them and their teachings. We also acknowledge our continued need to address racism, which continues to lead to the violent deaths of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. We know that racism, white colonialism, and anti-Semitism perpetuate inequalities, injustices, poverty, and exclusion in U.S. society. We commit ourselves, both as individuals and a community, to becoming more anti-racist, dedicated to equity, racial justice, and right relations. It's so good to be together as a loving and evolving community, gathering in and among so many different spaces. We especially note that a substantial part of our gathered community is joining us from their homes or other places. Wherever we are physically, our hearts and spirits are one. My name is Rob Zimmerman, and I serve on your board of trustees. My pronouns are he and him. Here are a few things to help you settle in and feel at home. Today is a regular Sunday morning of programming for children and youth. There are a variety of ways for all ages to participate. Our nursery is open, and after the worship for all ages, children in kindergarten through 6th grade are invited to go to their classes. As always, all ages are welcome here in the sanctuary. There's a worship exploration table over there, already getting good use, with a variety of activities for those who choose to stay here. Note that this year, our high school youth group is meeting following the service at 11:30 a.m. If you're a newcomer here, I hope you picked up a flyer on the way in that tells you all about what to expect and how to connect. We'd love to have you fill out the welcome side of the yellow paper you received when you entered, and hope to see you at the newcomers table in the foyer after the service. And if you're online and want more information, please email us at visitor@uucw.org. There's a time for coffee, tea, and conversation for everyone following the service. Find a comfortable place to hang out, here in the sanctuary, in the community room, in the library, and then challenge yourself to talk to someone you've not yet met. Let's build community together. I want to highlight a couple of announcements which you can also find printed in your order of service. Announcement 2, our engagement campaign starts today. In the community room, you'll find a variety of ways to volunteer at UUCW. Our goal is for everyone to find some way to serve that's personally meaningful. It's a great way to build community and get to know other members. Announcements 6 and 7 detail opportunities for all of us to participate in our settled minister search process. Please plan to attend a cottage meeting and share your ideas with the search team through their survey. And while you're at it, the transition team would like feedback on 3 possible mission statements. Use the link provided in announcement 7. It really is a privilege to have this once-a-week opportunity to explore and create meaning in the company of others. May this morning's service guide us on the path of truth and love. And now we'll have our chalice lighting, which will be the words of William Ellery Channing, read by Alex Jaworski.
Hey guys, this is Alex. I'm unable to be here today just because I'm going to be at a Packer game at the time of this session. But I would like to recite a few words from Reverend William Channing, which was written more than 150 years ago, and resonate with the session's approach and respect for developing faiths of young Unitarian Universalists. So let me read this quote. "The great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own, not to make them see with their eyes, but to look inquiringly and steadily with their own. Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth, not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward springs, not to bind them by ineradicable prejudices to our particular sect or peculiar notions, but to prepare them for impartial, conscientious judging of whatever subjects may be offered to their decision. Not to burden the memory, but to quicken and strengthen the power of thought. Not to impose religion upon them in a form of arbitrary rules, but to awaken the conscious, the moral discernment. In a word, the great end in religious instruction is to awaken the soul, to excite and cherish spiritual life." Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matt Umstadt, and I am one of the advisors to the YRUU youth group. I was also one of the 4 advisors to travel to Boston this summer with several of our high schoolers. We've put together this service today to both highlight several of the best moments from this trip, as well as connect our experiences to the growth we all enjoy when welcoming new challenges to our faith. This trip has been a hallmark of the YRUU experience for decades now, so much so that several of our current advisors actually went to Boston as teens themselves many years ago. However, this trip in particular was special for several reasons. First, it was our first trip back to Boston since our last one, planned for the summer of 2020, for some reason didn't turn out exactly like we planned. Second, 3 of our own advisors actually sent their own children on this trip to Boston, so we got to see their growth firsthand. And third, we were lucky enough to actually have a former YRUU teen on hand as an advisor, hi Miles, for a little compare and contrast the entire time. As we reminisce over the course of this service, I hope you all take away a few points we wanted to make. First, we were only able to go thanks to your support. Our fundraisers don't really work without all of you purchasing our baked goods and coffee, having your cars washed, or literally just donating funds out of the kindness of your hearts. Second, the future of our church and our faith is strong, and it's represented by these amazing teenagers you're about to meet. Third, I hope you continue to welcome this group as part of our community, even when their methods may seem strange or unfamiliar, or they may not engage with the church in the ways that we expect. As long as we continue to offer the gift of a warm, unconditional welcome, they will always come back. Thank you, and oh, wait, is that? Oh, it is. The youth group are coming! The youth group are coming!
Hello, my name is Tessa, and I'm one of the youth that went on the Boston trip this year. We began preparing for our Boston trip in the fall of 2022 with coffee sales and then weekly bake sales. Thank you to all who contributed to our trip by purchasing some coffee or baked goods, as well as contributing so generously to our trip jar. This amazing trip would not have been possible without your support. We ended our fundraisers with a car wash, which took a lot more elbow grease than baking cookies ever did. We all became car washing pros after that Sunday. The morning of our trip, our senior, Spencer Harris, posted this iconic message on our Facebook group. I'm sure some of you may have seen it. We were up early the morning of our departure when we met at 3 a.m. in the church parking lot to carpool with our drivers, Matt Wagner and Joel Harris, to the Chicago O'Hare Airport. And then we were off. We flew on a plane with a layover in Baltimore to get to Boston. And then we took the subway, or the T. Public transportation was not only less expensive for our small group on a tight budget, but also more eco-friendly. We purchased week-long passes for $20 that made it very affordable to travel back and forth across the city. For a few of us, this was our first time on a subway in a major city. Finally, we walked a ton to get around town, averaging 19,000 steps a day. Yeah. These pictures show us a colorful subway tunnel on the left, and on the right, walking across Boston Common near a new statue called The Embrace that shows Martin Luther King Jr.'s arms wrapped around his wife, Coretta Scott King, which is meant to honor their legacies in leading the civil rights movement. Our first stop was in the Boston Public Gardens, where we saw Duck Island in the middle of the lagoon. We then made our way over to the statues of ducks created to honor the book Make Way for Ducklings, written by author Robert McCloskey. At this time, we ask that any children who would like to see the story please come up to the front of the church, and we will show you the book while we listen to the recorded reading from Spencer Harris, who is at college in New York and unable to be here today.
Hi, I'm Spencer Harris, recently graduated senior, and today I will be reading Make Way for the Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. The next morning they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people. There was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird must have been too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard, as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted at last that Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But, "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. "You'll get run over!" And when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies, with all those horrid things running about. We'll have to look somewhere else." So, they flew over Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Lewisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. They flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice spot, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." So, they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until new ones grew in. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman named Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, then Lack, then Mack and Knack and Oak, and Pack and Quack. Yeah, that. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility, taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like, further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week, in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry, I know all about bringing up children," Mrs. Mallard said, and she did. She taught them how to swim and to dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Oak, Pack, and Quack fell into line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they waded to ashore and waddled all along till they came to the highway. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. "Honk, honk!" went the horns on the speeding cars. "Quack!" went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. "Quack, quack, quack!" went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. a mouthful. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arm and blowing his whistle. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and beckoned with the other, the way policemen do for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and made their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what? Ducks?" yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick!" Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street, with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mac, Knack, Oack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" While a man who swept the street said, "Well now, isn't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with the 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic, so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street, right on to the public garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policemen. The policemen smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long, they follow the swan boat and eat peanuts. And when the night falls, they swim to their little island, go to sleep. The end.
And now, Dave will take the RE lantern and lead those going out to their RE classes. Please join in singing our recessional As You Go. We then walked to the Massachusetts State House, which was designed by UU architect Charles Bulfinch in 1798. When we entered, we were greeted by beautiful architecture and, most importantly, air conditioning. The Hall of Flags is a very special room. It was built just to preserve and display the flags brought back from war by soldiers from Massachusetts. There are flags from the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I and II, the Korean War, the Berlin Emergency, and the Vietnam cases and never-ending hallways. And yes, we did get lost in here. Also had fun. Miranda practiced her State House oratory skills while I found a tribute to Dorothea Dix, an early 19th century Unitarian activist who drastically changed the field of psychiatry during her lifetime. She is a very important figure in both UU communities and the medical field, so I would like to share a brief reading about her life. Dorothea Dix lived in the 1800s at a time when women had fewer choices than men did. Dorothy made an extraordinary choice for herself. She did not grow up as a Unitarian, but chose to become one as an adult. Dorothy was religious, attending her grandmother's Congregationalist church every Sunday. One day, Dorothy decided to visit the Unitarian church where Dr. William Ellery Channing was speaking. What she heard that day changed her life forever. She heard Dr. Channing preach that God was love, and we are all a part of that love, and we are called to show that love to others. This was very different from the sermons she had heard in her own church. Dorothy became a Unitarian. After she got to know Dr. Channing, he offered her a job helping care for his children. She then lived with the Channing family for 6 months, traveling with them and tutoring the Channing children. When Dorothy was in her 40s, she visited a women's prison and saw women in chains with no clothes on. When she asked why, the prison matron told her that these people were mentally ill and didn't understand anyways. Dorothy was appalled. She was so upset, she called her friends in the Massachusetts government to tell them. They told her that they would need a written report before they could take any action. Dorothy went to every prison in Massachusetts and wrote a detailed report about the conditions for the mentally ill in each one. With her reports, Massachusetts began opening hospitals that treated the mentally ill with respect and gave them good food and clothing. Dorothy Dix began to travel to other states, investigating conditions in prisons, filing reports, and testifying before state legislatures. Some of the hospitals she started still stand today. So do her beliefs on the mentally ill that she put forth. Even when someone's words or behaviors cannot be understood by others, they are still a person who deserves dignity, respect, and love.
Across the street from the entrance of the State House is a memorial to Robert Goldshaw and the Massachusetts 54th Regiment. The 54th was the first unit in the Union Army made up of free black soldiers in the Civil War who fought with great honor. The story was retold in the movie Glory from 1989 starring Matthew Broderick, which we watched one evening at the hostel. In theory, it may seem alright to some, but when it comes to being made the instrument of the Lord's vengeance, I myself do not like it. This quote shows that even though Robert Goldshaw led with bravery and courage, he didn't love the idea of war. Finally, we return to our hostel, the Boston HI, or Hostel International, which is a newer, modern space. We prepared our first meal of tacos in the communal kitchen in the dining room and ate. Afterwards, we had our first evening shenanigans where our two pool sharks, Alex and Sam, enjoyed the common area. And then it was off to our bunk beds, where many fell asleep instantly, and we had been up since 2:30 a.m. the last day. Our first full day in Boston began with a 2-hour tour of Arlington Street Church, a historic UU church, and one of my favorite parts of the trip. The sanctuary was filled with a light that filtered through the Tiffany stained glass windows. It had pillars and high arches with the old style of enclosed pews. We filed into the pews and met our experienced and enthusiastic tour guide, Roger Vine, who was about to celebrate 50 years with the church as a now mostly retired organist and historian. His tour involved 4 parts: discussion of the history of the church, congregation and structure, the Tiffany windows, the organ, and the bell tower. In 1803, the church chose William Ellery Channing as the minister, a man frail in body but powerful in intellect and preaching. In 1827, Channing and Boston area ministers organized the Unitarian Sunday School Society. Channing claims that religion is not only a private, personal thing, but a social principle. This building you see here, the one we toured, was built in 1861. The church has so much history. In 1958, Dana McLean Greeley, the church minister, becomes president of the American Unitarian Association, helps to lead the merger of the Unitarian and Universalist associations, and is elected its first president from 1961 to 1969. One of the church members, James Reeb, was killed in the March on Salem. The church granted sanctuary to 2 veteran war resistors. Recently, in May 2004, the first church in segregation same-gender wedding in the United States is celebrated in the sanctuary. 3 days later, 55 weddings are performed in one day with 3 clergy officiating them. Here we have a picture of us at the pulpit in Arlington Street Church. We then learned about the famous Tiffany windows. Arlington Street Church has the largest collection of Tiffany stained glass windows with one theme, the life of Jesus. There are 16 stained glass windows and all that tell the story of Jesus from life to death, but no resurrection. Here you can see the images of the Sermon on the Mount and the Good Shepherd. In traditional accounts of young Jesus visiting the temple, he is portrayed as a boy among the temple's elders, and his mother is not featured. This depiction shows a parent reuniting with a lost child, evoking an emotional scene on a human scale. Mary reaches out to her son as he descends the stairs. A menorah in the background and elaborately decorated curtains on either side of the staircase indicate the setting of a temple. This image acknowledges that Jesus was Jewish, which is not something you would likely see in a Christian church. We then went up to the organ loft. This organ was built in 1957 and has 3,640 pipes. Behind the organ are the stairs leading to the bell tower. On the way up, you can see William Ellery Channing statue that directly faces the front doors of the church. Here we are, almost at the top of the bell tower after climbing an old set of stairs. Most bell towers have a single bell, or maybe 2 or 3, but this one has 14 bells with unique sounds.
11, 4, 6, 4.
That was a video of us playing all the 14 bells and from a hymn from one of Roger's books. And on to the second and highest level of the bell tower where the bells reside. Most of us made the climb to the top, seeing the dormant bells in a view of the city. At the end of our tour, Roger noted the last historical plaque that reads Arlington Street Church, Unitarian Universalist Congregation, 1729, formerly Federal Street Church, in which met the Massachusetts Convention that ratified the Constitution of the United States in 1788. And next, we had an unplanned moment where one person in our group, Spencer Harris, sat down at a public piano and began playing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liam. My brother Sam, who is the person playing pool earlier, was unable to make it today, but he was also on the trip. All right. Okay, so after a long but engaging morning at Arlington, we then had lunch and then set out to see more of the Freedom Trail. We visited the first of many cemeteries on this day. This is a photo of the old granary burial ground, which had the graves of many important historical figures. On the left is the headstone for Samuel Adams, and Paul Revere is on the right, where Spencer is adding a coin for good luck. We also saw one of two of the oldest cemeteries in the United States. This one dates back to the late 1600s. King's Chapel Burying Grounds was Boston's proper first burial ground, and it boasts a multitude of illustrious residents, including John Winthrop, which was the first governor of Massachusetts, and Mary Chilton, who was the first woman to step off the Mayflower. Back then, art was not allowed or encouraged by the Puritan Society, but one of the few places that people were allowed to be creative was on their gravestones. Joseph's tapping stone in front of the burying ground, which is where a skeleton and Father Time battle over the eventuality of death, may be one of Boston's most beautiful headstones. The other oldest cemetery is located in Salem, Massachusetts, which is where we visited the next day. It is by far the creepiest of all the cemeteries we went to. It includes the grave of Mr. John Hawthorne, who is best known for his early and vocal role as one of the leading judges in the Salem witch trials. We then continued on past the old Massachusetts State House, or the site of the Boston Massacre, to Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market, where we spent some time shopping and had our evening meal. And then after that, we went on our ghost tour with our famous Boston tour guide, Jeremiah Poop, where we learned about the mound of dead bodies in the center of Boston Commons. Yep, okay. And then he continued to scare us with the darkness descending as we walked through Boston's old Beacon Hill neighborhood, which looks awesome.
The next day, we decided to take a day trip to Salem, Massachusetts on our quest for truth and meaning. In a throwback to 10th grade English class, we visited the Witch Dungeon Museum, where we watched a live reenactment of one of Salem's witch trials, the trial of Sarah Good, which was performed verbatim to the court records of the trial. We learned that there were a lot of daily stress on all of the members of this community, with significant lack of food and rampant illness that may have contributed to the community's need to explain their dire circumstances somehow. We then had some free time to explore, go shopping, or tour some other historic sites in Salem.
My name is Miranda. Okay. After leaving Salem by train, we walked to northern Boston to see a few more Freedom Trail sites. This is the monument to honor the Battle of Bunker Hill, the first major battle of the Revolution. We waited our turn, ran, walked, or climbed more than 300 steps to the top. This is us at the top. We then moved to the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned ship of the US Navy. Here we are on a replica of the Anchor, and then Spencer, Tessa, and Alex in the captain's quarters in the ship. We then took a ferry home across Boston Harbor. Please join us now as we sing Blue Boat Home, number 1064 in the Teal Hymnal.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor nor port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my boat home. Sun my sail and moon my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greeting infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
On Sunday, we attended a service at the First Church Boston, the oldest UU congregation in Boston founded by Puritans. The church was established on July 30th, 1630, when John Winthrop and his party stepped off the Arbella. Their first official act, even before drawing up a charter for the city, was to create by themselves and sign a covenant for the first church in Boston. In this document, we find these words: "We solemnly and religiously promise and bind ourselves to walk in all ways in mutual love and respect each to other." They brought with them the progressive outlook which we carry on today. Though we no longer hold their belief in a single theology, however, the spirit of mutual love and respect among the men and women who were our founders is a living part of our heritage. We were fortunate to listen to a sermon about the only kitten syndrome by Lindsay Donnelly Bullington, who is currently studying for a Master of Divinity degree at Boston University School of Theology with the goal of Unitarian Universalist ministry. I then found my brave space and walked to share a joy of opportunity for us to visit this welcoming congregation in the city of Boston. Finally, we ended with a tour. Our service was in their air-conditioned chapel, but we were able to check in on their modern industrial worship space used during the fall and spring months. There was also a very old section of the church, some of which was still intact, and the rest was burned in a fire. Overall, we enjoyed the service and community at First Church Boston, which felt very similar to our own.
Okay, I am back. Okay, so after another lunch, we then toured the Black Heritage Trail, which is one prominent Black UU is Florida Ridley, and we have a reading about her, actually. Florida Ridley came from a prominent African-American Boston family that was active in the abolitionist movement. She was the second African-American teacher in Boston public schools. She was also a prolific writer, serving as the editor of Woman's Era Journal, which is the official journal of the National Association of Colored Women. In 1896, Ms. Ridley shared the following response to the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which is a landmark Supreme Court decision ruling that racial segregation laws did not violate the U.S. Constitution as long as the facilities for each race were equal in quality, a doctrine which came to be known as separate but equal. Her response was, "Appeals for justice by voice and pen go very little ways at present. Practically no attention whatever is paid to them. The time has come that they must be backed by aggressive action and physical as well as mental resistance. If laws are unjust, then they must be continually broken until they are killed or altered. The thing to do is to force the recognition of manhood by any and all means."
Thanks, Liam. I'm Valerie. Here's our final stop of the Freedom Trail, Old North Church, where Paul Revere's famous lantern was hung. Adding on to those principles of freedom, let's turn to building community through food. We were so lucky to have great restaurants in walking distance right next to our hostel. We built community by trying new things and preparing meals together. At this restaurant, some of us tried sushi for the first time, and we were all impressed with some of our group members' wasabi eating skills. We ended our last night with the trip to Little Italy, where we ate at Regina's Pizzeria, one of the oldest restaurants in town. That's a lot of food for thought. Next, let's highlight our visit to Harvard and MIT. To begin, we all got to rub John Harvard's lucky shoe. We snuck into the Divinity School and walked through a startled dean's office to get to the Emerson Chapel. Emerson Chapel is where Ralph Waldo Emerson gave his famous address discussing the failures of what he called historical Christianity, arguing instead for an idealistic view of human reason and goodness. At the time, Harvard was considered the center of Unitarian thought. Emerson's speech was criticized, and he would not be invited to speak there again for several decades. After Harvard, it was on to MIT for our continued search for truth and meaning. While Harvard was historical, MIT was more contemporary. It was cool to know students and faculty were working on inventions in real time. In MIT, we found the famous bust of Nikola Tesla, an inventor known for wireless power and other modern electrical designs. Near this was MIT's library, where we got to see the symmetrical Great Dome. Speaking of architectural masterpieces, the Skinny House, built as a spite house between two brothers, was visited to discuss compassion and human relations. Even with all the fun during the day, we still found time to build community at night by playing pool and, of course, more evening shenanigans with face masks for all.
Thank you. Our Split the Plate partner for September is Good Friend, Inc. UUCW helps address human needs and advance social justice in our community through our Split the Plate program. Each month we give half of all undesignated offerings to a nonprofit organization as a way to help live our Unitarian Universalist values. Good Friend, Inc. has a mission to create autism awareness, teach acceptance of differences, and give empathy for individuals on the autism spectrum. Now in their 16th year, the two moms who started this nonprofit began by talking to people in the school where their children, both on the spectrum, were encountering difficulties. By using social emotional tools, they have established a culture of acceptance with techniques like peer sensitivity training for students, empathy training for staff, and autism awareness programs in their community. Today, Good Friends, Inc. has moved from being advocates to being allies for people with this and other types of neurodivergence in schools, neighborhoods, businesses, and government agencies. Meaningful inclusion of students on the autism spectrum doesn't happen without intentionality. Over the years, Good Friend, Inc. has created and tested models that work effectively in schools, in businesses, and in communities. To support Good Friend, Inc., anytime this month, go to the UUCW website's Donate tab and select Split the Plate from the menu provided. Or you can text UUCW or mail your donation using the information found here. Thank you for supporting UUCW and Good Friend, Inc. We will now gratefully accept your offering.
Now we're going to talk about what was meaningful to us during this trip. The trip meant a lot for me. I was one of 2 freshmen that went on the trip. I am so grateful for how welcoming and kind everyone was. I learned so much about UU principles and want to thank all of you for making the Boston trip possible.
This trip was an incredible experience for me because I got to see an amazing amount of religious background and learn a lot of history about my religion, and also experience some amazing moments with some of my friends.
This trip was important to me because I got to go to the beautiful city of Boston with all my friends and youth group and learn a lot about the deep and rich history of the UU Church.
This trip meant a lot to me because it made me really, realize what it meant to be a Unitarian Universalist. And I think it really helped me, come into, knowing my own religion. And I think being able to plan this out for months and then finally being able to go on this trip with my friends and spending 5 days with them and, having so much fun while learning was really meaningful. And I really hope the future youth really enjoy this trip as much as I did.
My favorite part of this trip was getting to piece together the history found within the city of Boston. I consider myself a huge history nerd, so it was very fun getting to explore the history of not only Unitarian Universalism, but of our country. We're so grateful for the time that we had in Boston and how much we got to see, and we want to thank everyone who helped us get there.
At the end of all of our youth group meetings, we read these closing words. One person will read, then everyone at the end will hold their hands together and bow while saying namaste. I ask you all now to join us in the tradition and please rise in body and or spirit as we read. I honor the place in you in which the entire universe dwells, which is of light, of love, of truth, and of peace. When I am in that place in you, and you are in that place in me, we are one. Namaste, my soul bows to your soul. Namaste.